For the first time in 60 years, the Israel Defense Force has publicly released an outline of Israel's defense strategy. According to the Jerusalem Post, a key characteristic of the regional dynamics is the fact that the enemy strives to impose Islamic rule across the Middle East, including in Israel. The enemy seeks to exhaust Israeli society. In outlining the enemy's operational principles, it said that sub-state entities, especially Iranian-sponsored terrorist organizations, have increased, as these groups now strive for territorial expansion and sovereignty. For Israel to properly meet these challenges, the military will have to end the next campaign with a decisive victory that would allow it to dictate ceasefire terms." End quote. If this is true, then the next Israeli war with Hezbollah or Hamas may truly be decisive, an Israeli version of shock and awe. This would be in direct contrast to the last 4 Israeli wars, where the conclusion of each war was at best murky, but always leaving Israel bloodied by the international media, the UN, and the European Union. This strategy acknowledges that Israel must accomplish its military goals in days, not weeks, because the inevitable international and American pressure for a ceasefire will not allow any long-term military operation. On to Egypt. According to the Camp David Accord, the United States is required to keep a military presence in the Sinai. Yet it is now rumored that under the guise of danger to American soldiers from ISIS, President Obama may break the American pledge of assurance to Egypt and Israel by withdrawing American forces. In the aftermath of the Iran deal, it may be a signal to both Egypt and Israel of the administration's displeasure with both governments, as the administration still supports the democratically elected Muslim Brotherhood and despises the Israeli Prime Minister and its settlement policy. This withdrawal, if it happens, would create another vacuum that will be perceived as a victory for the Islamic State in the Sinai, and another security vacuum that America creates in the Middle East. Now, let's move on to Iran. In less than a month, members of the Senate and House will be voting on the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. So here are 5 questions undecided members of Congress must ask themselves before voting to accept or reject this agreement. Number 1, do you believe Iran can be trusted? Number 2, do you think America has the mechanisms in place within this agreement for snapback sanctions for Iranian transgressions of this deal? 3, do you believe the president when he says, according to the agreement, that Iran is never allowed to build a nuclear weapon, unquote, or that military force is still an option? 4, do you think the agreement makes America safer or less secure? And 5, do you believe there will be any consequences for Iranian transgressions as the deal is currently written? The American public is asking themselves these questions as well, and the results directly challenge the administration assurances. A recent Gallup poll revealed that 77% of Americans regard a nuclearized Iran as a critical threat to the United States. An August 3, 2015 poll by Quinnipiac confirmed these findings, as only 28% of the U.S. electorate supports the agreement. The president has said that if Congress rejects the JCPOA, the only alternative is war. Yet according to law professor Ord Kittry, senior fellow of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and former lead State Department attorney for nuclear affairs, the alternative of renegotiating this deal has overwhelming historical precedents. Opining in the Wall Street Journal, he wrote, quote, "The Iran deal is unsigned and not legally binding. Mr. Kerry has repeatedly referred to it as a, quote, political agreement, unquote. Non-binding, unsigned political agreements receive less deference and are considered more flexible than treaties or other legally binding international agreements. Congress should be comfortable sending this back for renegotiation," end quote. Renegotiating a nuclear deal would not even be unprecedented for the current Obama administration, which was forced by Congress in 2009 to renegotiate a nuclear treaty with the United Arab Emirates. The administration then did extract more concessions so that the UAE would not engage in enrichment. The promise of snapback sanctions also seems hollow when you consider what has happened over this summer, but has not made it onto the front page of the New York Times or other pro-administration media sources. First, there was the announcement of the proposed sale of the advanced S-300 Russian anti-missile system, contravening existing sanctions. but it barely registered a response from the White House. Then it was reported that General Qasem Soleimani, who's blacklisted by the United Nations, met with President Putin of Russia to discuss supplying these air defense missiles to Tehran. Mr. Soleimani is the head of the notorious Iranian Al-Quds overseas terrorist unit, the Quds Force, which functions as the foreign wing of Iran's elite Revolutionary Guards. It was designated by the United States as a supporter of terrorism in 2007 and by the EU in 2011. This should be a very clear message to Congress that every egregious Iranian violation will be ignored without a consequence. The marching orders are clear. Nothing must derail the President's vision of a reoriented Middle East, with Iran in the lead. On the inspections front, the administration at first promised unfettered 24/7 snap inspections in the final deal, but that was conceded in the final agreement. What most people don't realize is that the administration also accepted no American inspectors would be permitted into Iran to verify this deal. So let me get this straight. America negotiated the deal with a serial cheating nation, and we cannot have an American inspector check for cheating as part of the IAEA team to Iran. We even agreed it is okay for the Iranians to take their own soil samples to test for illicit nuclear activity. Unbelievable. The administration is also trying to have it both ways on conventional weapons and the nuclear deal. First, it promised the agreement would only be about the nuclear issue, and then it included lifting sales of conventional weapons and ballistic missiles in 5 and 8 years respectively. So now that the nuclear deal includes conventional weapons and missiles, John Kerry was asked by Congress, if Iran breaks current sanctions on conventional weapons and ballistic missiles, will that be considered a breach of the nuclear agreement? Kerry said no. Short of Iran detonating a nuclear weapon, is there any consequence this administration would consider imposing on Iran for violation of this agreement? Mr. Kerry tried to reassure Congress by saying there are mechanisms in place to prevent Iran from supplying Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies. Seriously? Is he kidding? Those mechanisms that he is referring to are the United Nations Security Council resolutions, which have allowed over 100,000 missiles to enter Lebanon for Hezbollah over the last 10 years, and the mechanism that Secretary of State Kerry laws has stopped 0 missiles. I wish he were negotiating for our adversaries. Finally, who said the following, quote, "This agreement does not rely on trust. Compliance will be certified by the International Atomic Energy Agency," unquote. The quote is President Bill Clinton trying to reassure Congress and the American public about the North Korean nuclear agreement in October 1994. Today, North Korea possesses 20 nuclear bombs, which is exactly what will happen with Iran at any time of their choosing if the current agreement is allowed to stand. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool the American people twice, shame on us.